Welcome to lesson number 2 in our study of the book of Daniel. Chapter 1 closed with glowing accolades for Daniel and his 3 young friends. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his kingdom. Daniel 1 and 20. The events of chapter 2 illustrate just how much Daniel and his friends distinguished themselves in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. And so let's begin reading chapter 2. Now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, "I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream." Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. "O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation." The king replied to the Chaldeans, "The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore declare to me the dream and its interpretation." They answered a second time and said, "Let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation." The king replied, "I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh." Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious, and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. It is the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, and by the somewhat complicated Babylonian method of reckoning the years of a king's reign, that would make it about the year 603 or 602 BC. Daniel and his friends had now been in Babylon for about 3 years, and were probably just completing Nebuchadnezzar's re-education program for gifted young men. The text says that the king had dreams, plural, which might be indicative of a recurring dream or nightmare. However, he seems to have had one particular dream, one that he sensed carried a message of utmost importance that he could not remember. And it had him so disturbed about what it might mean that he couldn't sleep. So Nebuchadnezzar called in all his court wise men, the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the astrologers, literally the Chaldeans. These 4 designations are used almost interchangeably, and probably identified different ranks or guilds of practitioners of the magical arts. No distinction in the precise nature or methods used in their craft seems to be intended. The Chaldean guild derived their name from the ancient peoples who occupied and ruled the area of Babylon about 1,000 years earlier, around the time of Abraham. They seem to have been the most prestigious of the wisdom guilds. But one thing is certain, magic was a big business in Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, and now it was time for the practitioners to either put up or shut up. Nebuchadnezzar commanded the wise men to tell him both the content and the meaning of his perplexing dream. Thus, he was conducting something of a trial by ordeal of the authenticity and integrity of his sages. If they could accurately divine the content of the dream, then they could be trusted to accurately interpret its meaning. And for this, they would be lavishly rewarded. If they failed, however, they would be exposed as frauds, and their lives and property would be forfeited. I think this gives us a bit of insight into the mind and character of Nebuchadnezzar. Like many ancient despots, he had the capacity for both ruthless cruelty and extravagant generosity. Unlike many, however, he seems to have been deeply insightful and intelligent. He could recognize who is giving him trustworthy counsel and who is playing him for a fool. In his own way, Nebuchadnezzar seems to have been a genuine searcher for truth. Well, when the wise men failed to divine the contents of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the entire magician caste in Babylon was summarily sentenced to death. The role and status of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah within the imperial bureaucracy at this particular time is unknown. But they were clearly not present when Nebuchadnezzar challenged the sages with his dream. More than likely, they were still in their training program and not yet in active service. But nevertheless, they were included in the group sentenced to death under the king's decree. Their first knowledge of the whole affair came when the officers came to arrest them. And at this point, Daniel went directly to Nebuchadnezzar, where he asked for and received time to interpret the dream. We pick up the reading in verse 14. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He said to Arioch, the king's commander, "For what reason is the decree from the king so urgent?" Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. The very fact that Daniel was able to gain an audience with the king at all was remarkable, because access to the royal presence was usually highly restricted. Even more remarkable was the fact that Daniel was actually granted the time he asked for, especially when we remember that Nebuchadnezzar had severely castigated the wise men for playing for time in verse 8. Perhaps Daniel's straightforward honesty made an impression on the king. At any rate, Daniel's first move upon leaving Nebuchadnezzar's throne room was to go to his three friends and share the matter with them. And together they prayed, begging God for mercy regarding the mystery in order that they might not be executed along with the rest of the wise men. And I think it's interesting that they prayed only for God's mercy and compassion, not specifying how they expected that compassion to be manifested. They didn't pray for the mystery to be revealed to them. They were completely open to God's sovereign will in the matter. Nevertheless, that very night, God revealed the mystery to Daniel. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, "Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and spoke to him as follows: Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. When the Old Testament was translated into Greek, the Aramaic word raz in verse 18 was translated by the Greek word mysterion, and that seems to have set a precedent for later Jewish apocalyptic literature, including the New Testament book of Revelation, in referring to God's hidden agenda in human history as mystery. Indeed, Daniel learned that the message of Nebuchadnezzar's dream concerned things which would happen in days to come. Verse 28. Upon receiving the interpretation of the mystery, Daniel broke out into lavish praise and thanksgiving to the God who had given him his wisdom and power and had answered his prayer. I want to draw your attention especially to verses 21 and 22 in Daniel's prayer. It is he who changes the time and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. These verses effectively sum up the theme of the entire book of Daniel. Whether it was Nebuchadnezzar at the present time, or Belshazzar or Darius later in the narrative, these powerful kings were going to learn firsthand that the real ruler of the world is God. He is the overseer of human history. He alone is powerful to raise up and tear down kings and nations. He alone knows the future, and he reveals it only when it serves his own divine purposes, and he reveals it only through the people of his own choosing. It's a truth well worth remembering in our own chaotic and sinful world today. After his prayer, Daniel went to Arioch, the military commander in charge of the execution of the wise men, and made two requests. First, he requested that he would delay implementing the execution of the wise men, anticipating, of course, a rescinding of the king's decree. And second, he requested that he would arrange a second audience for Daniel with Nebuchadnezzar so that he might interpret the dream for him. Arioch quickly complies with Daniel's request, and soon Daniel stood before Nebuchadnezzar again. Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows: I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered before the king and said, As for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turned to what would take place in the future. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. Nebuchadnezzar's anxiety and anticipation were probably obvious in the tone of his voice when Daniel appeared before him the second time. Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel's response was a marvelous testimony to the glory of his God and a denial of any extraordinary wisdom or power on his own part. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than any other living man. This would be the pattern for Daniel's relationship with Nebuchadnezzar for as long as the king lived. Nebuchadnezzar had, to say the least, a high opinion of himself, and he could go to great lengths to show off his wealth and power. But Daniel had a knack for putting the king in his place without being insolent or disrespectful. So after his clear disclaimer of any supernatural knowledge or wisdom of his own, Daniel was ready to reveal the king's dream and its meaning. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. After you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. Then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron. Inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom. But it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men. But they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. The historical counterparts of the kings and or kingdoms associated with the various parts of the image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, as well as the identity of the rock which destroyed the image, have been discussed and disputed for ages. And many an interpreter has wanted to see events of their own day as being the fulfillment of parts of Daniel's visions and prophecies, and usually for self-serving or nationalistic reasons. After the death of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa in AD 1190, some German churchmen anticipated Frederick's return as the emperor of the last days. They identified Germany with the stone cut without hands. And the future Frederick would restore her to the position of supremacy which God had always intended for her. The four world empires of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, destined to be destroyed by Germany, were identified as England, France, Spain, and Italy. Well, the real focus of the dream is not the fortunes of any earthly nation or king, but the outworking of the plan of God in human history leading up to the establishment of his kingdom among men. The first empire represented in the dream is clearly Babylon. Daniel himself says as much in verse 38. The last empire is the one which would be in power when God enters human history to establish his everlasting kingdom, which will ultimately supplant all other human power and authority. That kingdom was established in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, about AD 30. We see that in Acts chapter 2. The dominant world empire at that time was Rome. So with this information in hand, we can fairly easily reconstruct the historical counterparts of the components of Nebuchadnezzar's image. The head of gold is the Babylonian Empire. The chest and arms of silver are the Medo-Persian Empire. The belly and thighs of bronze represent the Greek empires of Alexander the Great and his successors. And the legs of iron, including the feet and toes of iron and clay, are the Roman Empire. This is the only interpretation of the dream that is consistent with the theological message of this book. Nebuchadnezzar's dream carried two important messages. First, there was a message for Nebuchadnezzar himself. Although he is the self-styled King of Kings, as we see in verse 37, it is the God of heaven who has given him his dominion and power. That dominion and power can and will be taken back and given to someone else in God's own good time. Moreover, the day is coming when God will establish his own kingdom among men. And when it is fully consummated, all human power will be rendered obsolete and destroyed. Second, there was a message for the Jewish exiles. Although they are under bondage to a cruel pagan empire, God is still in control of the course of human history, and his righteous ends are being accomplished. And when God's purposes for these human kingdoms have been served, they will be blown away like chaff, leaving the kingdom of God without rivals and his people without enemies. Therefore, they have every reason to maintain faith and hope throughout their years of captivity. Well, the chapter closes with Nebuchadnezzar's response to Daniel's revelation of the dream. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel, and gave orders to present to him an offering and fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, "Surely your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel was at the king's court. On hearing Daniel's revelation and interpretation of his dream, Nebuchadnezzar recognized that he had heard nothing less than the word of God. He fell prostrate on the ground, worshiping the God of Israel in the best way he knew how, by paying homage to his prophet. At this time, Daniel was elevated to the position of ruler of the entire province, not the entire empire, but the entire province of Babylon. And he was placed in charge of all the wise men who clearly owed him their lives. Daniel's response to all these accolades was humble and responsible. He remembered the prayers and support of his three friends during the crisis, and he arranged for them to be appointed to administrative posts over the province. And in so doing, he demonstrated not only genuine gratitude, but a capacity for efficient and effective leadership, which would serve him well through many future crises in his life. And so, in the aftermath of God's revelation through Daniel of the meaning of his dream, Nebuchadnezzar was humbled, well, at least for the time being. We can't help but notice that the king confessed Daniel's God as a God, but not necessarily the God. He recognized Daniel's God as a revealer, but not the revealer of mysteries. Nebuchadnezzar still had much to learn, and most of that learning would come through the proverbial University of Hard Knocks. In our next lesson, we'll see the next step in Nebuchadnezzar's continuing education in the absolute sovereignty of the God of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
You will